The doorbell rang at 7:14 p.m. on a Thursday in late October. The kind of evening when the Colorado air carried the first real bite of winter. Ethan was halfway through microwaving leftover stir-fry when the sound jolted him. His roommate Caleb was out at a study group, so Ethan wiped his hands on a dish towel and opened the door without thinking twice. A man stood there, broad-shouldered, wearing a navy wool coat dusted with early snowflakes. His hair was thick, dark with silver threading through the sides, and his eyes sharp hazel, locked onto Ethan's with the kind of directness that made Ethan forget how to speak for a second. "You must be Ethan," the man said, voice low and steady, like gravel smoothed by a river. "I'm Richard, Caleb's dad. He said I could crash here tonight since my flight got delayed." Ethan blinked. Caleb had mentioned something about his dad passing through Denver on business, but that was weeks ago, and Ethan had assumed it was one of those vague family plans that never materialized. Now here was Richard Hayes, 6'2" of quiet authority, holding a small duffel bag and looking like he'd just stepped out of a catalog for expensive outdoor gear. "Right? Yeah. Come in." Ethan stepped aside, heat creeping up his neck. "Caleb's not back yet, but he should be soon." Richard nodded once, polite but not overly warm, and walked past Ethan into the small living room. The apartment smelled faintly of soy sauce, and the pine candle Caleb insisted on burning to make it feel like home. Richard set his bag down and glanced around. The mismatched thrift store couch, the coffee table littered with textbooks and empty energy drink cans, the string lights Ethan had hung last Christmas and never taken down. "Nice place," Richard said, though his tone suggested he was being diplomatic. "It's temporary," Ethan replied, closing the door. "We're both finishing up grad school. Rent's cheap." Richard shrugged off his coat, revealing a charcoal sweater that fit him perfectly. He was in his late 40s, Ethan guessed, fit, not gym-obsessed, but the kind of man who hiked on weekends and knew how to fix things around the house. Ethan caught himself staring and turned toward the kitchen. "You hungry? I was just heating up food." "I'm good, thanks. Just need a shower and a place to charge my phone." "Long day." Ethan pointed toward the hallway. "Bathroom's there. Towels are in the cabinet. Caleb's room is the one with the posters. You can take his bed if you want. I'll crash on the couch." Richard paused, studying him. "You don't have to do that. It's fine. Really." Their eyes met again, longer this time. Ethan felt something shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like the moment before a storm when the pressure drops. Then Richard gave a small nod and disappeared down the hall. Ethan stood frozen in the kitchen, heart thudding too hard. He told himself it was nothing, just surprise at having a stranger in the apartment, a man who looked like he belonged on a billboard rather than in their cramped two-bedroom. But when Richard emerged 20 minutes later, hair damp, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and sweatpants, Ethan had to grip the counter to steady himself. They ended up on the couch anyway, Caleb texting that the study group was running late and not to wait up. Richard asked about Ethan's thesis, something on urban sustainability, and listened with genuine interest, asking sharp questions that made Ethan feel seen in a way he hadn't in months. The conversation flowed easily, too easily. Richard laughed once, a low rumble, when Ethan admitted he still couldn't parallel park. "You're 24? Richard asked, eyebrow raised. 25 next month." Richard shook his head. "Makes me feel ancient." Caleb's 23. "Sometimes I forget he's not a kid anymore." "You're not ancient," Ethan said before he could stop himself. "You look good." The words hung there. Richard's gaze flicked to Ethan's mouth, then back up. Neither of them moved. The front door opened. Caleb burst in, snow in his hair, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Dad, sorry I'm late. Group project from hell." Richard stood, pulling his son into a quick hug. "No worries. Ethan kept me company." Caleb grinned at Ethan. "Thanks, man. You're the best." Ethan forced a smile, but his pulse hadn't slowed. As Caleb chattered about his day, Ethan watched Richard watching him, and something unspoken settled between them like a promise no one had asked for. That night, Ethan lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling while the apartment settled into quiet. He could hear the faint creak of bed springs from Caleb's room, the low murmur of father and son talking. He closed his eyes and tried not to imagine what it would feel like to be the one Richard was speaking to in the dark. By morning, Ethan had convinced himself the previous night was a fluke. Richard was straight, at least that's what Caleb had always implied. Divorced for 8 years, focused on his construction firm in Boise. No time for dating. Just a dad crashing on a layover. But when Ethan woke to the smell of coffee brewing, he found Richard in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, pouring 2 mugs like he lived there. "Caleb's still out cold," Richard said, sliding 1 mug toward Ethan. "Figured you'd need this." Ethan took it, fingers brushing Richard's. The contact lasted half a second too long. "Thanks." They stood in silence, drinking coffee while snow fell outside the window. Richard broke it first. "You grew up here?" "In Denver. Suburbs. Boulder, actually. Moved here for school." Richard nodded. "Caleb says you're the responsible one. Keeps him from burning the place down." Ethan laughed softly. "Someone has to." Richard's eyes softened. "He lucked out with you as a roommate." The compliment landed heavier than it should have. Ethan looked down at his mug. When Caleb finally stumbled out, yawning, the moment dissolved. Breakfast was pancakes. Richard insisted on making them, claiming it was the least he could do. They ate at the tiny table, knees bumping under it. Ethan tried to focus on his plate, but every time Richard spoke, his voice pulled Ethan's attention like gravity. Richard's flight was rescheduled for the evening. "Looks like I'm stuck here another day," he announced after checking his phone. Caleb groaned playfully. "Great. Now I have to share my snacks." Ethan's stomach flipped. Another night. The day passed in ordinary pieces. Caleb at class, Ethan working on his laptop at the coffee shop down the street. But Richard stayed at the apartment, reading reports on his tablet, occasionally texting Ethan questions about local restaurants or good trails nearby. Each message felt deliberate, like breadcrumbs. By evening, Caleb had plans, dinner with friends, then a party. "You two will be okay?" he asked, shrugging into his jacket. Richard waved him off. "Go. Have fun." After Caleb left, the apartment felt smaller. Richard ordered Thai takeout. They ate on the couch, a football game on low volume as background noise. Conversation drifted from safe topics to riskier ones. "You seeing anyone?" Richard asked casually, eyes on the screen. Ethan hesitated. "Not really. Been focused on school." Richard turned to look at him. "That's a shame. You seem like someone worth knowing better." Ethan's throat went dry. "What about you?" "Divorce was messy. Haven't bothered since." Richard paused. "Until recently, maybe." The air thickened. Ethan set his plate aside. "What does that mean?" Richard didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached over and brushed a speck of sauce from the corner of Ethan's mouth with his thumb. The touch was electric. "I think you know," Richard said quietly. Ethan didn't pull away. He leaned in instead. Their first kiss was slow, careful testing. Richard's hand cupped the back of Ethan's neck, steady and sure. When they parted, both breathing hard, Richard rested his forehead against Ethan's. "This is complicated," Richard murmured. "I know, but I'm not sorry." Ethan kissed him again, deeper this time, letting the truth of it sink in. They didn't go further than kissing and holding each other on the couch, but it was enough to crack something open inside both of them. When Caleb came home at 2 a.m., they were asleep in separate rooms, but the secret was already alive between them. The next morning, Richard's flight was back on. He packed while Ethan made coffee, the silence heavy with everything unsaid. At the door, Richard paused. "I'll be back in town next month. Business meeting." Ethan nodded, heart hammering. "Text me when you land." Richard looked at him for a long moment, then pulled him into a quick, fierce hug. "Take care of my kid." "I will." Then he was gone. The weeks that followed were torture and exhilaration in equal measure. Texts started innocently. Richard sending photos of job sites, Ethan replying with memes or updates about Caleb. But they grew bolder. Late-night messages, confessions, Richard admitted he hadn't stopped thinking about that night. Ethan admitted the same. When Richard returned in December, he booked a hotel instead of staying at the apartment. Safer, he texted Ethan. They met at a quiet bar near campus. Richard looked tired but happy to see him. They talked for hours, then walked back to the hotel in the snow. In the elevator, Richard kissed him like a man who had been starving. That weekend was stolen moments. Dinners, long drives, nights in the hotel room where they explored each other with reverence and urgency. No promises, just the raw honesty of two people who shouldn't want this but did. Caleb noticed Ethan was distracted. "You okay, man? You've been weird." "Just stressed with finals," Ethan lied. Guilt gnawed at him, but not enough to stop. Spring brought tension. Richard visited more often, always under the guise of checking on Caleb. Each trip deepened the affair. They were careful, never at the apartment, always discreet. But secrets have weight. Caleb started dating a girl named Mia. He was happy, lighter. Ethan tried to be happy for him, but every time Caleb talked about his dad, Ethan's stomach twisted. One weekend in April, Richard arrived unannounced. Caleb was thrilled. They planned a barbecue at a park. Ethan went along, playing the good roommate. At the park, while Caleb grilled burgers, Richard and Ethan found themselves alone by the picnic table. "I miss you," Richard whispered. Ethan glanced toward Caleb. "We can't keep doing this." "I know." But they did. That night, after Caleb crashed early, Richard slipped into the living room where Ethan was pretending to study. They kissed quietly on the couch, hearts pounding at every creak. Then the door to Caleb's room opened. Caleb stood there, frozen, eyes wide. "Dad!" The word shattered everything. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Caleb didn't yell. He just stared, face pale, then walked back into his room and shut the door. Ethan tried to follow. Caleb locked it. Richard stood, hands shaking. "I'll talk to him." But Caleb wouldn't open the door. He texted Ethan, "Get out." Ethan packed a bag and left for a friend's place. Richard stayed, trying to explain through the door. Hours later, Caleb finally emerged. The conversation was private, but Ethan heard raised voices, then silence. The next day, Caleb moved out temporarily, staying with Mia. He wouldn't look at Ethan. Richard met Ethan at a coffee shop. His face was haggard. "He hates me," Richard said. "He thinks I groomed you or something, that I betrayed him." Ethan felt sick. "Did you tell him it wasn't like that?" "I tried. He won't hear it." They sat in silence. Then Richard reached across the table. "I don't want to lose you, but I can't lose him either." Ethan pulled his hand back. "Then choose." Richard's eyes filled. "I can't." Ethan stood. "Then we're done." He walked out into the spring rain. Months passed. Caleb and Ethan patched things slowly. Awkward apologies, tentative conversations. Caleb forgave Ethan first, saying he understood attraction wasn't a choice. But Richard remained a wound. Richard stopped coming to Denver. He and Caleb talked on the phone, strained but civil. Ethan graduated, moved to Seattle for a job. He dated, but nothing stuck. 1 year later, a text from an unknown number. "I'm in Seattle for work. Coffee?" It was Richard. Ethan stared at the message for a long time. They met at a small cafe near the water. Richard looked older, quieter. "I ended things with the company," Richard said. "Stepped back, trying to fix what I broke." Ethan nodded. "Caleb? We're better. Not great, but better." Silence stretched. "I still think about you," Richard admitted. "Every day." Ethan looked out at the water. "Me too." Richard waited. Ethan took a breath. "But we hurt him. We hurt each other." "I know. So what now?" Richard's voice cracked. "I don't know. But if there's even a chance, I'd like to try again. The right way. No secrets." Ethan studied him. The man who'd upended his life, the man he still loved. Is love worth the wreckage it leaves behind? Or should some feelings stay buried forever?